The Arizona sun hung like a molten coin in the bleached sky, beating down on Broken Mesa with the kind of heat that made men see things that weren't there. Rebecca Cross pulled her worn hat lower over her eyes and quickened her pace through the dusty main street, hoping to reach the general store before the afternoon heat became unbearable. She'd been in this godforsaken town for 3 days now, just long enough to rest her horse and replenish supplies before moving on. That was how she lived these days, never staying anywhere long enough for folks to ask questions about the wedding band she still wore, or the medical instruments carefully wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of her saddlebags. The war had been over for 5 years, but some wounds never healed. Some ghosts never stopped following. Rebecca was lost in thought when the commotion erupted near the saloon. A crowd had gathered, their voices rising in that peculiar mix of excitement and fear that meant violence. She should have walked on by, should have minded her own business like she'd learned to do, but old habits died hard, and the healer in her couldn't ignore the copper scent of blood cutting through the desert air. Pushing through the crowd, she saw him. The man was tall, even slumped against the hitching post as he was. His face bore the sharp angles and bronze skin that marked him as having Apache blood, though his clothing was that of a frontier scout, worn leather and dusty cotton. With a gun belt slung low on his hips, blood seeped steadily from beneath his left hand where it pressed against his ribs, staining his shirt dark. "Someone fetch the doc," a woman said, though she made no move to help. "Doc's drunk again," another voice replied. "Besides, he won't treat no half-breed." Rebecca watched the wounded man's jaw tighten at the slur, but he said nothing. His dark eyes swept the crowd with a predator's wariness. Even as his strength ebbed with each heartbeat, those eyes found hers, held them. There was pride there, and pain, and something else, a fierce determination not to show weakness before these people who watched him bleed with such casual interest. She'd seen that look before, in field hospitals where men tried to die with dignity when dignity was all they had left. "Move aside," Rebecca heard herself say, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of barking orders over cannon fire and screaming men. The crowd parted, more from surprise than obedience. The man's eyes narrowed as she approached. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35 to her 28. His face would have been handsome if not for the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, and the hard lines that spoke of a life lived on the knife's edge. "I don't need your pity, woman," he said, his voice low and rough as desert stone. "Good, because I'm not offering any." Rebecca knelt beside him, her trained eye already assessing. "That's a knife wound, deep, but it missed the lung or you'd be drowning in your own blood by now. You need stitching." "Then stitch it." She met his gaze steadily. "I'll need supplies, clean water, whiskey, thread." "I said stitch it." He shifted, grimacing, and pulled a leather pouch from inside his vest. Gold coins spilled onto the dusty ground. "What's your price?" The crowd murmured at the sight of so much money. Rebecca felt their eyes on her, calculating. A woman alone with medical skills and no visible protection was already a target. A woman with gold would be a corpse by morning. "I can't treat you here," she said quietly. "Too much dirt, too many eyes." His laugh was bitter. "No one in this town will give shelter to Antonio Stormwalker. They'll take my gold quick enough when I'm buying supplies or information, but bleed on their doorstep." He shook his head, then swayed slightly. "I'll manage." "You'll die." The words came out sharper than she intended. "That wound needs proper cleaning and stitching, or infection will finish what the knife started. You have maybe 3 hours before you're too weak to ride. Less if you keep losing blood at this rate." Antonio studied her for a long moment. "You were Army," he said. It wasn't a question. "Once. Union or Confederate." "Does it matter?" "Not to me." He tried to push himself upright. Failed. Tried again. This time Rebecca caught his arm, steadying him. His muscles were corded iron beneath her fingers. "I have a place. Canyon country, 2 hours north. Private, Safe, his eyes bored into hers. "What's your price? Healer." Rebecca glanced at the crowd, saw the greed and hostility in equal measure. She thought of her plans to keep running, to never stop long enough for the past to catch up. Then she looked at the man bleeding in the dust, too proud to beg and too stubborn to die easy. $20, she said, plus the cost of supplies. Done. He struggled to his feet, Rebecca supporting more of his weight than either of them would admit. "Can you ride?" "Can you?" That earned her another of those bitter laughs. "Woman, I've ridden with worse. My horse is at the livery, the bay stallion." They made their way through the crowd, Rebecca acutely aware of every eye following them. At the livery. She saddled her own mount, a steady mare she'd bought in Texas, while Antonio pulled himself onto a magnificent bay that looked like it could run to Mexico without breaking a sweat. "Stay close," he said, wheeling his horse toward the north road. "And if I fall off, tie me to the saddle and keep going. The canyon's marked by 3 standing stones. You'll see them." The ride was a nightmare of heat and dust. Antonio swayed in his saddle but kept his seat through what Rebecca recognized as pure will. She watched the trail of blood drops in the dust and calculated how much he could lose before he went into shock. Not much more. The land changed as they climbed, red rock replacing sandy waste. Saguaro cactus stood like sentinels, and somewhere a hawk screamed. Rebecca had never been this far into Apache territory, and every shadow could hide an enemy. But Antonio seemed to draw strength from the landscape, sitting straighter despite the pain that etched deeper lines around his eyes. "There," he said finally, pointing to 3 tall rocks standing like fingers against the sky. "Through that gap." The canyon was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. It twisted and turned, hiding what lay beyond each bend. A perfect place for an ambush, Rebecca thought, her hand moving instinctively to the Colt Navy revolver hidden beneath her duster. Then the canyon opened into a hidden valley, and she caught her breath. A small adobe house sat beside a spring-fed pool, sheltered by cottonwood trees. A garden grew in neat rows, corn and beans and squash. It was an oasis carved from stone and stubbornness, beautiful in its improbability. "Home," Antonio said, and fell off his horse. Rebecca was out of her saddle before he hit the ground, her hands already working to stem the fresh bleeding his fall had caused. He was conscious but fading fast, his skin taking on the grayish pallor that meant shock. "Inside," he managed. "The boy. Don't let him see." Boy. Rebecca looked up to see a small figure standing in the doorway of the adobe house, a child, maybe 6 years old, with his father's dark eyes and angular features. He stood perfectly still, watching them with an expression too solemn for such a young face. "It's all right," Rebecca called out, not knowing if the child spoke English. "Your father's hurt, but I'm going to help him." The boy said nothing, didn't move, just watched as Rebecca half-carried, half-dragged Antonio toward the house. The man was heavy, solid muscle and bone, and by the time she got him inside, her own clothes were soaked with sweat and blood. The interior was sparse but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs. A ladder led to what must be a sleeping loft. Rebecca got Antonio onto a narrow bed in an alcove, then turned to find the boy standing right behind her, silent as a ghost. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The child's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. His eyes, so like his father's, filled with something that might have been frustration or fear. "He doesn't speak," Antonio said weakly. Not for a long time. His name is—" He paused, gathering strength. "I call him Little Fox, like his mother did." Rebecca nodded, filing away questions for later. "Little Fox, I need hot water. Can you show me where things are?" The boy stared at her for a long moment, then moved to the fireplace where a pot hung over cold ashes. His movements were quick and efficient, those of a child who'd learned early to be useful. While the water heated, Rebecca unpacked her medical supplies. The instruments were Union Army issue, stolen from a field hospital in Georgia when she'd walked away from the surgeon's tent and never looked back. She'd kept them clean and sharp, the way Dr. Morrison had taught her before a Confederate shell took off half his head at Gettysburg. "The whiskey's in that cabinet," Antonio said, his voice growing weaker. "And if something happens, there's a man in Tucson, Miguel Hernandez. He'll take the boy." "Nothing's going to happen except you're going to shut up and let me work." Rebecca poured whiskey over her instruments, then her hands. The familiar ritual calmed her, pushed away memories of other men bleeding out while she fought to save them. She cut away Antonio's shirt, revealing a torso marked by old scars and new muscle. The wound was as bad as she'd feared, a deep puncture between the ribs, still seeping. But her initial assessment had been correct. No bubbling blood, no frothing. The lung was intact. "This will hurt," she warned. "Do it." Rebecca cleaned the wound with whiskey, ignoring Antonio's sharp intake of breath and the way his hands fisted in the blanket. Little Fox watched from across the room, his small body tense as a drawn bowstring. The needle felt familiar in her fingers as she began to stitch, in and out, neat and precise, the way she'd sewn up hundreds of wounds in tents that stank of gangrene and death. But this was different. This was one man in a quiet room, with a child watching her every move. "You're good at this," Antonio said through gritted teeth. "I've had practice." Army surgeon. Surgeon's assistant. Learned by doing when the real doctors started dying faster than we could replace them. She tied off another stitch. "Hold still. Almost done." When she finished, she wrapped the wound with clean cloth and helped Antonio drink water mixed with willow bark tea for the pain. His color was better already. The immediate danger passed. "You'll live," she said, washing her hands in the basin Little Fox had silently provided. "But you need rest. No riding, no sudden movements. That wound opens up again and you might not be so lucky." Antonio's eyes were already drooping from exhaustion and blood loss. "The boy," he murmured. "Don't leave him alone. He gets scared." Rebecca looked at Little Fox, who had crept closer during the surgery. The child stood just out of reach, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that was almost physical. There was something in that gaze, a desperate hope, maybe, or a plea she couldn't quite understand. "I'll stay until you're on your feet," she heard herself say, even as the rational part of her mind screamed that this was a mistake. She didn't get involved, didn't form attachments, didn't stay. But Antonio was already asleep, and Little Fox was still watching her with those two old eyes, and outside the desert wind sang through the canyon like a lament. Rebecca sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. She'd meant to ride on today, to keep running from ghosts that would never stop chasing. Instead, she was in a hidden canyon with a wounded half-Apache gunman and his silent child. Her hands still smelling of blood and whiskey. The smart thing would be to leave at first light, take her $20 and go. She looked at Little Fox, who had settled on the floor near his father's bed like a faithful dog. The boy's eyes never left her face, as if he was memorizing every detail, every movement, as if he was afraid she'd disappear if he blinked. Rebecca sighed, knowing already that she wouldn't leave tomorrow. Maybe not the day after, either. There was something about this place, these people, that had slipped past her defenses without her noticing. Some wounds, she was learning, could only be healed by opening yourself up to new ones. Outside, the desert began its transformation from day to night, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold, and in a small adobe house hidden from the world, 3 damaged souls began the delicate dance of learning to trust, each carrying scars that might never fully heal but might, perhaps, fade a little in the presence of unexpected kindness. Rebecca woke to the sound of silence so complete it made her ears ring. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The adobe walls were wrong, the light filtering through the window too red. Then memory crashed back the wounded man, the hidden canyon, the silent child. She'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Antonio's bed, her neck cramped from the awkward position. Dawn painted the room in shades of rose and gold. And somewhere outside, a mockingbird was greeting the day with borrowed songs. Antonio still slept, but his breathing was deeper now, more regular. The fever she'd feared hadn't materialized, though she knew the real test would come over the next few days. Infection was a patient killer, waiting for caregivers to grow complacent. A small sound made her turn. Little Fox stood in the doorway, already dressed, watching her with those unnervingly steady eyes. He held something in his hands, a cup of water. She realized, offered with the solemnity of a communion ritual. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly, accepting the cup. The water was cool and sweet, drawn from the spring she'd glimpsed outside. "Did you sleep at all?" The boy's eyes flicked to his father, then back to her. He shook his head once, a motion so small she almost missed it. "He'll be all right," Rebecca assured him. "Your father's strong. The wound was clean. Whoever did this used a sharp blade, not a rusty one. That's good for healing." Little Fox moved closer, drawn by either her words or her tone. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly. He had his father's sharp features softened by youth. But there was something else there, too, a delicacy around the eyes and mouth that must have come from his mother. His hair was thick and black, cut short in the Anglo style, though a leather cord around his neck held what looked like a small medicine bundle. "Are you hungry?" Rebecca asked. "I could make breakfast if you show me where things are." The child studied her for a long moment, then moved to a corner of the room where shelves held provisions. His movements were quick and economical, selecting items and placing them on the table: cornmeal, dried beans that had been soaking overnight, a jar of preserved peaches, salt pork wrapped in cloth. Rebecca watched him work, noting how he knew exactly where everything was, how carefully he handled each item. This was a child who'd learned early to take care of himself and others. Too early, perhaps. "Your father taught you well," she said, moving to examine the supplies. "My husband used to say a man who can't cook is only half ready for the frontier." She stopped, surprised at herself. She never talked about James, never mentioned the life she'd had before the war tore everything apart. But something about the boy's silent attention made the words come easier. Little Fox had found a cast-iron skillet and placed it on the stove, then stood back, waiting. Rebecca took the hint and set about making breakfast, keeping up a gentle stream of conversation even though the child never responded. "I learned to cook from my mother back in Ohio. She used to say that food was medicine too, that a good meal could heal the spirit even when the body was hurting. Of course, she never had to cook over a campfire with artillery shells falling around her." She trailed off, lost in memory. The smell of cornbread frying brought her back. Little Fox had pulled a stool close to the stove, watching her every move with intense concentration. "Want to learn?" Rebecca asked impulsively. "Here, I'll show you when to flip the cornbread so it doesn't burn." She guided his small hand to the skillet's handle, showing him how to shake it gently to see if the bread was loose. His face lit up with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to make her heart twist. They were just plating the food when Antonio stirred. His eyes opened slowly, focusing first on his son, then on Rebecca at the stove. Something flickered across his face: surprise, maybe, or a pain that had nothing to do with his wound. "Smells good," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You need to eat," Rebecca said, bringing him a plate. "Build your strength back up." She helped him sit up, noting with satisfaction that the bandages showed no fresh blood. His color was better too, the gray pallor of yesterday replaced by his natural bronze tone. "Little Fox helped with breakfast," she said. "He's a good assistant." Antonio's eyes went to his son, who had perched on the edge of the bed with his own plate. "That's so, mijo." The endearment slipped out naturally, softening the harsh lines of his face. Your mother would be proud." The boy ducked his head but moved closer to his father, careful not to jostle the bed. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the clink of forks on plates and the morning birds outside. "I should check your wound," Rebecca said when they'd finished. "Make sure everything's holding." Antonio nodded, setting aside his plate. As Rebecca unwound the bandages, she was aware of Little Fox watching anxiously. The wound looked good, no red streaks, no putrid smell, just the clean line of her stitches holding flesh together. "You heal fast," she observed, applying fresh salve made from plants she'd found in the garden that morning. Desert marigold and chaparral, the same remedies the Apache used. "Have to, in my line of work." Antonio's voice was carefully neutral. "Man who stays down too long doesn't stay alive." "And what exactly is your line of work?" Rebecca kept her tone light, but she'd been wondering since yesterday. The house spoke of stability, permanence, but the scars on Antonio's body and the wariness in his eyes told a different story. "I hunt," he said simply. "Track things that need finding. Sometimes people, sometimes information, sometimes both." "For who?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "Whoever pays best, Army, mostly. Sometimes Wells Fargo, sometimes others." Rebecca nodded, understanding more than he'd said. A man of mixed blood would find few welcome doors in the territory, but someone who could track like an Apache and speak English like an Anglo, that man would be valuable to those who needed to navigate between worlds. "Is that how you got hurt hunting?" "Hunting the wrong thing, maybe." His eyes went distant. "There's a man, Jack Brennan, runs guns to anyone with gold, Apaches, Mexicans, Confederate holdouts. Doesn't matter to him who dies as long as he profits." "And someone hired you to find him." "Army did. Only Brennan found out. Has eyes and ears everywhere. One of them put a knife in me yesterday when I was asking questions in Broken Mesa." Antonio shifted, wincing slightly. "Should have been more careful. Getting slow." Rebecca finished with the bandages, but before she could move away, Antonio caught her wrist. His hand was warm, calloused, gentle despite its strength. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "Truth now, not many would stick their neck out for a breed, especially one bleeding out in the street." Rebecca looked at his hand on her wrist, then at Little Fox, who was watching them both with an expression of desperate hope. "I took an oath once," she said quietly, "to do no harm, to help those who need it. Just because the war ended doesn't mean the oath did." "That's not the only reason." She met his eyes, seeing too much understanding there. "No, I suppose it's not." She gently freed her wrist. "Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I saw something in your boy's eyes that reminded me of things I'd rather not remember." Antonio studied her for a long moment. "You lost a child." It wasn't a question. Rebecca felt the familiar pain lance through her chest, sharp as any blade. "Among other things." "I'm sorry." 2 simple words, but the weight of understanding behind them made her eyes sting. She turned away, busying herself with putting away the medical supplies. "Tell me about his mother," she said, needing to deflect. "Little Fox has her eyes. I think—" Antonio was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was soft, meant for his son as much as her. "Elena was her name. Met her down in Mexico. 8 years ago. I was running from some trouble. Found myself in her father's village. She was fire and grace. You know, taught school to the little ones. Could make anyone laugh, even a hard case like me." Little Fox had crept closer, drawn by his father's voice. Antonio reached out, ruffled the boy's hair. "She had a voice like honey. Used to sing all the time, morning, noon, night. Little Fox here would dance to her songs before he could even walk proper." His face darkened. "Then the raiders came, Comancheros, looking for slaves to sell south. I was gone, tracking for the army. Came back to—" He stopped, but Rebecca could fill in the rest. The tragedy was written in the lines of his face, in the silence of his son. He hasn't spoken since, Antonio finished. 3 years now. Sometimes I hear him crying at night, but no words, never any words. Rebecca looked at little Fox, who had pressed himself against his father's side. The boy's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his mouth remained firmly closed. Trauma can lock the voice away, she said gently. I've seen it before. In the war, sometimes it comes back on its own. Sometimes it needs help. Doctors in Tucson said there's nothing wrong with his throat or tongue, said it's all in his head. Antonio's arm tightened around his son, said he might never speak again. Doctors can be wrong. Rebecca moved closer, kneeling so she was at eye level with little Fox. The voice is there. It's just hiding, waiting until it feels safe to come out again. The boy stared at her with those two wise eyes, slowly, carefully. He reached out and touched her hand. His fingers were small, warm, trembling slightly. I had a little boy once, Rebecca heard herself say. Younger than you. He loved to sing too, just like your mama. Used to make up songs about everything his toys, his breakfast, the chickens in the yard. When the fever took him, the house got so quiet, I thought I'd go mad from it. She turned her hand palm up, letting little Fox trace the lines there with one finger. Sometimes I still hear him singing in my dreams. Sometimes that's the only thing that keeps me going. Antonio made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sigh. When she looked up, his eyes were wet. You understand, he said simply. Yes, and she did. The weight of loss, the way it shaped you, carved out hollow spaces that nothing else could fill, but also the way those spaces could sometimes shelter other broken things, like a canyon hiding a spring-fed pool. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Rebecca showed little Fox how to make a poultice from desert plants, teaching him to identify the healing herbs by sight and smell. The boy absorbed everything with that same intense focus, following her around the small house like a shadow. Antonio dozed fitfully, fighting the rest his body needed, more than once. Rebecca caught him trying to get up, only to sink back with a barely suppressed groan. You're worse than the soldiers I used to treat, she scolded. They at least had the sense to stay put when ordered. Never was much good at taking orders, he admitted. Ask anyone who's tried to give them. But he stayed in bed, watching as Rebecca and little Fox worked together. There was something in his expression when he looked at them, a longing, maybe, or a recognition of something he'd thought lost forever. As the day wore on, the heat built up even in the shaded canyon. Rebecca found herself shedding her heavy duster, rolling up her sleeves as she helped little Fox tend the garden. The boy showed her his favorite plants, the ones his mother had planted that still bloomed despite 3 years of a child's imperfect care. She'd be proud, Rebecca told him, touching a flowering vine that climbed the garden wall. You've kept her memory alive in the most beautiful way. Little Fox's face transformed not quite a smile, but a lightening that made him look his age for the first time since she'd met him. He plucked one of the flowers, a deep red bloom she didn't recognize, and offered it to her with grave ceremony. Thank you, she said, tucking it behind her ear. It's beautiful. From the doorway came a sound, Antonio clearing his throat. When they turned, he was standing there, one hand braced against the frame for support. You shouldn't be up, Rebecca started, but he waved her off. Wanted to show you something, he said. While it's light, little Fox, bring the box from under my bed. The wooden one. The boy ran to comply, returning with a carved box that looked Mexican in origin. Antonio sank into a chair at the table, gesturing for them to join him. Inside the box were treasures, a woman's silver comb, a small painted portrait, letters tied with ribbon, a child's carved wooden horse worn smooth from handling. But Antonio reached past all of these to pull out a small leather journal. Elena's, he said, placing it on the table. She wrote in it every day, thoughts, stories, Songs for Little Fox. He looked at his son. I've been saving it for when you could read it yourself. But maybe it's time to share it. With careful hands, he opened the journal. The pages were covered in neat Spanish script, interspersed with little drawings, flowers, birds, a child's laughing face. This one, Antonio said, pointing to a page. She wrote this the day before. It's about you, mijo, about how you were starting to put sentences together, telling stories about the lizards in the garden. Little Fox leaned forward, drinking in the sight of his mother's handwriting. His mouth moved silently, as if trying to form the words she'd written. Would you read it? Antonio asked Rebecca. My Spanish is rough, and she wrote prettier than she talked. Rebecca took the journal carefully. Aware of the trust being offered, her Spanish was serviceable, learned from treating Mexican soldiers and civilians during the war. She began to read, translating as she went. My little fox sang to me today about the green lizard who lives under the water barrel. He says the lizard has a family of 12 children who all wear tiny hats. When I asked where they got the hats, he said very seriously that they made them from flower petals. This child will be a storyteller like his grandfather. I think already he sees magic where others see only desert. She continued reading as the afternoon shadows grew long, bringing Elena's voice back into the house that had been silent for so long. Sometimes Antonio would add a memory how Little Fox had insisted on leaving water out for the lizard family, how he'd made tiny petal hats to prove his story true. Through it all, Little Fox listened with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. His eyes never left the journal, his body tense as a held breath. Once, his lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. The moment passed, but Rebecca saw it, saw the words trapped behind his teeth, fighting to break free. When she finally closed the journal, the sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of fire. They sat in the gathering dusk, each lost in their own thoughts, bound together by the shared weight of loss and the fragile hope of healing. Thank you, Antonio said finally. It's been a long time since this house heard her words. She lives in him, Rebecca said, looking at Little Fox. In his eyes, his careful hands, the way he tends her garden. Voices can be silenced, but love always finds a way to speak. Little Fox stood abruptly and walked to Rebecca. For a moment, he just looked at her, his dark eyes swimming with emotion. Then, with the same grave ceremony with which he'd given her the flower, he took her hand and pressed it to his chest, over his heart. The gesture said more than words could have. Rebecca felt her own heart constrict, the careful walls she'd built threatening to crumble. This child, this silent boy who carried such grief with such grace, was offering her something she'd thought lost forever, a chance to mother again, to heal by healing others. I understand, she whispered. And she did. Some wounds ran too deep for quick fixing. Some voices took time to find their way back. But here in this hidden canyon, with the memory of a dead woman's words hanging in the air and the trust of the living warming her heart, Rebecca began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could all find their way back to something like wholeness. The desert night closed around them, bringing its own kind of peace, and in the small adobe house, 3 damaged souls sat together in companionable silence, learning the first tentative steps of the dance that would, perhaps, lead them home. The days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Rebecca would wake before dawn, check Antonio's wound, then start breakfast with Little Fox as her silent helper. The boy had taken to shadowing her every move, learning the art of healing with the same intensity his father must have once applied to tracking. It had been a week since she'd stitched Antonio back together, and the wound was healing clean. He could move now without wincing, though Rebecca still forbade any heavy work. Not that he listened particularly well. You're worse than a penned Mustang, she told him on the 8th morning, finding him trying to chop firewood despite her explicit instructions. Do you want those stitches to tear? Wood won't chop itself, Antonio replied, but he set the axe down at her glare. Besides, I'm feeling fine, better than fine. It was true. The gray exhaustion that had clung to him those first days had lifted, replaced by a restless energy that reminded Rebecca of cavalry soldiers eager to return to their units. But there was something else in his manner, too, a careful awareness of her. The way his eyes followed her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. Fine or not, you'll follow doctor's orders, she said firmly. Little Fox and I can manage the chores. As if summoned by his name, the boy appeared from the garden, carrying a basket of late summer vegetables. He set them on the table and looked between the two adults with those watchful eyes that missed nothing. Your father's being stubborn again, Rebecca told him conversationally. What should we do with stubborn patience? Little Fox tilted his head, considering. Then, with great deliberation, he walked to the shelf where Rebecca kept her medical supplies and brought back a length of bandage, offering it to her with a solemn expression that might have been humor. Antonio laughed a real laugh, rich and unexpected. You'd tie me up, would you, mijo? Your mother tried that once when I wanted to ride out with a broken rib. Didn't work then either. The mention of Elena no longer brought the sharp silence it once had. Over the past days, Antonio had begun sharing stories more freely, painting a picture of a woman who was both fierce and tender, learned and wild. Tell me about how you met, Rebecca said, settling at the table to clean the vegetables. You said you were running from trouble. Antonio sat across from her, his movements still careful but steadier each day. Little Fox perched between them, arranging the vegetables by type with methodical precision. Bar fight in Tucson. Antonio admitted, 5 against 1, and the one was too proud to back down. Would have ended bad if Elena's father hadn't intervened. Don Vicente, they called him, old Mexican rancher with hands in a lot of pockets. He saw something in me, offered me work. And Elena, a smile softened his features. She hated me at first, called me a savage, a hired gun with no soul. Used to lecture me about violence while bandaging wounds I got protecting her father's interests. He shook his head at the memory. Took her 6 months to admit she didn't actually hate me, another 3 to admit why. Rebecca found herself smiling too. She sounds formidable, like a thunderstorm in a dress, but gentle too, when she wanted to be. She had this way of seeing through all the hard bark to what was underneath. Made you want to be better just to deserve that look in her eyes. The words hung in the air, taking on weight. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned her attention to the vegetables, aware that Antonio was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She would have liked you, he said quietly. You can't know that. I can. His voice carried certainty. You have the same steel in you. The same way of looking at broken things and seeing what they could be instead of what they are. Little Fox made a small sound, not quite speech, but purposeful. When they looked at him, he was holding one of the tomatoes he'd grown, offering it to Rebecca with that grave ceremony she was coming to recognize as his way of showing approval. Thank you, she said, accepting it. These are the best tomatoes I've seen outside of Ohio. You have your mother's gift for growing things. The boy ducked his head, pleased. He returned to sorting vegetables, but Rebecca noticed he'd moved his stool closer to her chair. Such a small thing, but it made her chest tight with emotion. The morning passed peacefully. Rebecca showed Little Fox how to prepare a tincture from desert willow bark, while Antonio cleaned his rifle at the table. The domestic scene so normal it made her heart ache with dangerous longing. This was what she'd lost, not just James and little Samuel, but the simple rhythm of days shared with people who mattered. "Riders coming," Antonio said suddenly, his voice sharp. He was at the window before Rebecca could blink, rifle in hand. 2 men, stay inside. But Rebecca was already moving to the window, peering out carefully. 2 riders were navigating the canyon passage. their horses picking their way through the familiar trail with sure steps. "It's all right," Antonio said, tension leaving his shoulders. "It's Miguel." The lead rider was a compact Mexican man with silver threading his black beard. His companion was younger, lean and watchful. Both were armed but kept their hands visible as they approached. "Compadre," Miguel called out as they reached the house. "You look better than when I saw you last. The saints have smiled on you." "The saints had nothing to do with it," Antonio replied, stepping out to greet them. "Miguel, Carlos, this is Rebecca Cross. She's the reason I'm still breathing." Miguel swept his hat off, revealing a scalp marked by an old scar. "Then we owe you a debt, Senora. This fool is too valuable to lose to a back-alley knife." "Just doing what needed doing," Rebecca said, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Both men were studying her with interest that went beyond casual curiosity. "You're the healer from Broken Mesa," Carlos said, "the one who walked through that crowd like Moses parting the sea. They're still talking about it." "Nothing so dramatic," Rebecca protested. "No," Miguel grinned. "The way they tell it, you ordered grown men around like errant schoolboys and had them scrambling to obey, in a town that barely tolerates Antonio's presence. That's no small thing." They came inside, Little Fox greeting Miguel with obvious affection. The older man produced a piece of hard candy from his pocket, winking as he handed it over. "How's our little warrior?" he asked. "Still keeping your papa out of trouble?" Little Fox nodded solemnly, pointing to Antonio's healing wound and then to Rebecca with clear meaning. "Smart boy," Miguel said. "Knows to credit the right person." He turned to Antonio. "We need to talk. Brennan's been asking questions about you. Bad questions." The easy atmosphere evaporated. Antonio's face went hard. "Professional? How bad?" "He knows you survived. Knows someone helped you. He's putting gold on the table for information about where you're holed up." Miguel accepted the coffee Rebecca offered with a nod of thanks. "Won't be long before someone talks." "Then I need to move." "We need to move," Miguel corrected. "You think I'm letting you face that snake alone? Carlos and I have been tracking his movements. He's got 8 men with him now, maybe 9. Too many for a straight fight." Rebecca watched this exchange, understanding more than they were saying. Brennan wouldn't stop until Antonio was dead. He couldn't afford to leave a witness alive. "And if he found this place?" "You could go to the army," she suggested. "Tell them what you know about his operations." "With what proof?" Antonio shook his head. "My word against his? And he's got important friends. No, this ends only one way." "Then we end it smart," Miguel said. "Draw him out. Pick his men off one by one. Divide and conquer, like you taught me." They spent the next hour discussing tactics, locations, possibilities. Rebecca tried to stay out of it, but her mind kept working the problem like a puzzle. She'd seen too much war to believe violence was never the answer, but she also knew the cost it extracted. "There's another way," she said finally. "You're thinking like hunters, but what if you thought like healers instead?" The men looked at her blankly. Brennan's strength is his connections, his ability to move freely because he's useful to powerful people, she explained. What if that usefulness ended? What if the army suddenly had detailed information about every deal he's made, every shipment he's arranged? Not from Antonio, from documents, evidence that couldn't be dismissed. "And how would we get such evidence?" Carlos asked skeptically. Rebecca smiled, the expression sharp. "The same way I got through that crowd in Broken Mesa, by walking in like I belong there and taking what I need." Antonio leaned forward, interested despite himself. "You're talking about theft. I'm talking about justice. Brennan has to keep records men like him always do. They can't resist documenting their cleverness. Find those records, get them to the right hands, and let the law do your killing for you." Miguel whistled low. "The lady thinks like a general, but Brennan keeps his papers close. No one gets into his private rooms without invitation." "A woman might," Rebecca said quietly. Especially one with medical skills. Men like Brennan always have ailments they don't want public. A discreet healer, recommended by the right people. No. Antonio's voice was flat. Absolutely not. Why? Because it's dangerous. More dangerous than facing 9 men in a gunfight. Because you're not part of this. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is my fight, my problem to solve. Is it? Rebecca rose too, anger flashing through her. What happens when Brennan finds this place, when he comes here looking for you and finds Little Fox instead? Antonio whirled, eyes blazing. You think I don't know that you think that doesn't eat at me every damn hour? Then let me help. The words came out louder than intended. I've already sewn you back together once. I'd rather not have to do it again. Or worse, have to explain to your son why his father isn't coming home. They stood facing each other, the air between them electric with tension. Miguel and Carlos exchanged glances and quietly excused themselves, taking Little Fox out to see to the horses. Why? Antonio asked when they were alone. Why does this matter to you? You could leave tomorrow. Be safely away from all this. Rebecca turned away, struggling to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because I'm tired of running, tired of being a ghost drifting from town to town with nothing but memories for company. Because your son looks at me like I might be the answer to prayers he can't speak aloud. Because, She stopped, unable to voice the rest. Because you look at me like I'm not just a convenience or a skilled pair of hands. Because this place feels more like home than anywhere has since the war. Because I'm terrified of how much I want to stay. Rebecca. His voice was closer now, right behind her. Look at me. She turned slowly. He stood near enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, smell the sage and leather scent of him. His hand rose, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I won't lose anyone else to violence, he said softly. Not when I can prevent it. And I won't watch anyone else die when I could have prevented it, she countered. We're at an impasse. They stood frozen, caught between advance and retreat. Then Antonio smiled, a rueful twist of lips that transformed his face. Elena would have liked you very much, he said. She had the same stubborn streak, same way of making sensible arguments for insane plans. Was that a compliment? Of sorts. His hand was still near her face, fingers barely grazing her cheek. If I said yes to this plan, and I'm not, but if I did, how would it work? Rebecca's heart beat faster, though she told herself it was from winning the argument. First, I'd need to establish myself in Tucson as a legitimate healer. That would take time. References. Then word would need to reach Brennan about a discreet woman who could help with delicate matters. Men talk in saloons, the right words in the right ears. You've thought this through. I've had a week to think while watching you heal. It seemed better than planning your funeral. That startled a laugh from him. Practical. Someone has to be... They were standing too close now, the space between them charged with possibility. Rebecca knew she should step back, re-establish proper distance. Instead, she found herself studying the scar that ran along his jaw, wondering how it would feel under her fingers. Rebecca, he said again, her name a question and warning both. Whatever might have happened next was interrupted by Little Fox bursting through the door. Miguel and Carlos on his heels. The boy's face was alight with excitement as he tugged Antonio toward the corral. What is it, mijo? Antonio asked, allowing himself to be pulled along. In the corral, a spotted mare was nuzzling a new foal, still wet and wobbly on stick legs. Little Fox's whole body vibrated with joy as he watched the baby horse take its first uncertain steps. Would you look at that? Miguel said softly. New life, always a good omen. Rebecca found herself standing beside Antonio, their shoulders almost touching as they watched Little Fox approach the foal with careful, gentle movements. The boy's face showed more animation than she'd seen in all their days together. He loves horses. Antonio murmured, "Gets that from both sides, Apache and Mexican. We're horse people to the bone." The foal, curious and unafraid, stretched its neck toward Little Fox's outstretched hand. When they touched, the boy's mouth opened in a silent laugh of pure delight. "There," Rebecca said quietly. "You see, joy finds a way too, even in the hardest ground. That's what we're fighting for, not just survival, but moments like this." Antonio looked down at her, something shifting in his expression. "You're a dangerous woman, Rebecca Cross. Because I can stitch a wound. Because you make hope seem possible again." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest, some last defense crumbling. She'd come here planning to stay just long enough to ensure Antonio's survival. But somewhere between that first sunrise and this moment, with new life taking its first steps and a silent child's joy painting the air golden, she'd stopped being a visitor and started being part of something larger than her own grief. "So," Miguel said, approaching with studied casualness, "do we have a plan?" Antonio looked at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. "We have the beginning of one." Antonio said, "But it's going to take all of us, and it's going to be dangerous." "My friend," Miguel grinned, "when has that ever stopped us?" As the men began to talk strategy again, Rebecca watched Little Fox with the foal. The boy had found a brush and was gently grooming the baby's damp coat, his movements careful and sure. This was worth fighting for this child, this place, this fragile possibility of family rising from the ashes of loss. She'd been a ghost for too long, haunting her own life. Maybe it was time to be something more. Maybe it was time to stop running and start building instead, even if what she was building might still fall apart. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and rust, and, in the corral, a silent boy and a newborn foal discovered each other, while the adults who loved him began planning a war that would be fought not with bullets alone, but with the far more dangerous weapons of hope and trust. The peace shattered 3 days later like glass under a boot heel. Rebecca was teaching Little Fox to identify medicinal plants in the garden when the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Too many horses. Coming too fast. Antonio materialized from wherever he'd been watching. He was always watching now, rifle in hand. "Inside," he ordered, but Rebecca was already moving, pulling Little Fox with her. Through the window, she counted 6 riders picking their way through the canyon passage. Not Brennan himself, she could see that even from a distance, but men with the hard look of those who killed for coin. "Scouts," Antonio said grimly, checking his ammunition. "Testing our defenses. How did they find us?" "Gold loosens tongues. Someone always talks." He positioned himself by the window, steady as stone. "Take Little Fox to the root cellar. Bar the door from inside." Like hell. Rebecca was already loading the shotgun she'd found mounted above the fireplace. "You face 6 men alone, and they'll ride you down." "This isn't your fight." "We've had this argument." She pumped the shotgun for emphasis. "I'm not very good at following orders either." Something flickered in his eyes, frustration, admiration, fear, but there was no time for debate. The riders were spreading out, professional and cautious. "Little Fox, the cellar," Antonio said firmly. "Now." But the boy shook his head, grabbing his father's ammunition pouch and taking position by the back window with his own small rifle, the one Antonio had been teaching him to use for hunting. "Maldita sea," Antonio cursed. "Stubborn as your mother, both of you." "They're trying to flank us," Rebecca observed, tracking movement through her window. 2 heading for the barn, 2 for the garden wall. "Let them come." Antonio's voice had gone cold, professional. "The canyon works both ways. Hard to flank when you can't spread out." The first shot came from outside, shattering the kitchen window. Rebecca ducked, glass showering over her, then rose and fired back. The shotgun's roar was deafening in the enclosed space. but she saw one rider spin away, clutching his shoulder. Then everything became chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the adobe walls pocking with bullet holes. Antonio fired with mechanical precision, every shot deliberate. Rebecca reloaded, fired again, trying not to think about how familiar this felt, the acrid smoke, the percussion of gunfire, the strange clarity that came with life-or-death moments. "The barn!" Antonio shouted. 2 riders had made it to cover and were laying down suppressing fire. Rebecca saw the danger immediately if they got behind the house. The defensive position would crumble. "Cover me," she said, heading for the door. Rebecca, no. But she was already moving, sprinting across the open ground. Bullets whined past like angry wasps. But she'd learned in the war that hesitation killed more surely than bullets. She made it to the garden wall, pressed herself flat, then worked her way toward the barn. The riders hadn't seen her coming. They were focused on the house, convinced they had the defenders pinned. Rebecca came around the corner of the barn and found herself 10 feet from 2 men who turned too late. The shotgun spoke twice. Both men went down. She felt nothing in that moment would feel it later. She knew, in the small hours when the faces of every man she'd killed came visiting. But now there was only survival. "Rebecca?" Antonio's voice, sharp with fear. She turned to see another rider bearing down on her. Pistol raised, no time to reload, no cover to reach. She saw her death in the bore of that pistol, black and final. The shot came, but not from the rider. He jerked, fell sideways from his horse. Behind him, impossibly, stood Little Fox at the corner of the house, his small rifle still smoking. The remaining 2 riders had seen enough. They wheeled their horses, spurring hard for the canyon exit. Antonio's rifle cracked twice more, and 1 man slumped forward, barely keeping his saddle. Then they were gone, leaving only dust and gun smoke and the copper smell of blood. "Is anyone hurt?" Rebecca called, already moving to check the fallen men. 2 were dead, 1 still breathing, but not for long. "We're all right," Antonio answered. He emerged from the house with Little Fox held tight against his side. The boy was pale but steady, his eyes too old for his young face. Rebecca knelt beside the wounded man, automatically assessing even though she knew it was hopeless. Gut shot and bleeding out, maybe minutes left. "Water," the man gasped. She fetched it, helped him drink. It was what she'd do for any dying creature. "Brennan," the man whispered. "He knows about the boy, wants leverage." Ice flooded Rebecca's veins. She looked up at Antonio, saw her own understanding reflected in his face. This hadn't been about killing Antonio. This had been about taking Little Fox. The man died with a rattling sigh. Rebecca closed his eyes, then stood on legs that wanted to shake. "We can't stay here," she said. "No." Antonio's voice was rough. "They'll be back with more men. Tonight, maybe tomorrow." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said. "This place, it's your home. Home is where my son is safe." He looked down at Little Fox, who still held the rifle that had saved Rebecca's life. "You did well, mijo. Your mother would be proud, but I need you to understand taking a life changes you, even when it's necessary, even when it's right. That weight stays with you." Little Fox nodded solemnly. Then, in a gesture that broke Rebecca's heart, he set the rifle carefully aside and wrapped his arms around his father's waist, hiding his face. "We need to move fast," Antonio said over his son's head. "Take only what we can carry, Rebecca." "I'm coming with you," she said it firmly, brooking no argument. "We're past the point of pretending I'm just passing through." Something shifted in his expression. "No, we're not, but we need to be smart about this. Miguel has a place." He broke off at the sound of more horses, but these riders called out as they approached, and Rebecca recognized Miguel's voice. "Antonio, we heard the shooting." Miguel and Carlos rode in hard. taking in the scene with professional eyes the bodies, the bullet-scarred walls, the grim faces of the defenders. "How many?" Miguel asked. "6. 2 got away. Then we have hours at most." Miguel dismounted, already thinking ahead. "Carlos, help them pack. I'll deal with these." He gestured to the bodies. They worked with desperate efficiency. Rebecca gathered her medical supplies and what food they could carry. Antonio packed ammunition, weapons, and a few precious items, Elena's journal, the carved wooden horse, a photograph. Little Fox collected his own small treasures, including one of the red flowers from his mother's garden, pressed quickly between the pages of a book. "The foal," the boy's eyes pleaded with his father. "We'll come back for them," Antonio promised. "When it's safe, Miguel will check on them." Within an hour, they were ready. 4 horses, 3 riders, and a child who sat in front of his father, still clutching his pressed flower. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked as they entered the canyon passage. "South first," Antonio said. "There's a mission station where we can rest, then we'll see. Brennan won't expect us to go to ground in Mexico." They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca found herself looking back once at the hidden valley that had sheltered them so briefly. The adobe house sat peaceful in the late afternoon light, as if violence had never touched it. But she could still smell gun smoke on her clothes, still feel the shotgun's kick against her shoulder. "You saved my life," she said quietly to Little Fox. "Thank you." The boy twisted in the saddle to look at her, his mouth opened, closed. For a moment, she thought he might speak. Then he simply reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the saddle horn. A gentle pat of acknowledgement. He's never done that before. Antonio said softly, "Fought to protect someone, even when his mother..." He trailed off. "He's brave, like his father." Like you." Antonio's voice carried something that made her chest tight. "You didn't have to come out of that house. Didn't have to face those men." "Yes, I did." Rebecca kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "I've lost too much to fear already. I won't lose more." They rode through the gathering dusk, the desert painting itself in purples and golds, somewhere behind them. Brennan's men would be regrouping, planning, but for now, they were alive and together, even if together meant running. "There's something else," Antonio said as full dark approached. "What that dying man said about leverage? Brennan doesn't just want me dead anymore. He wants to hurt me first. That means..." "That means he'll use anyone close to you," Rebecca finished. "I understand the danger." "Do you?" He reined in, forcing her to stop beside him. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows. "This isn't just about doctoring anymore. Rebecca, you stay with us. You become a target too. Every bounty hunter and hired gun in the territory will know your face. Is that really what you want?" Rebecca thought about the empty years behind her, drifting from town to town with nothing but grief for company. Then she looked at Little Fox, drowsing now against his father's chest, still clutching his pressed flower. At Antonio, who watched her with eyes that held fear and hope in equal measure. "What I want," she said slowly, "is to stop running from life because I'm afraid of death. What I want is to see that boy find his voice again. What I want..." She stopped, the words too large, too dangerous for the fragile thing growing between them. "Say it," Antonio urged softly. "What I want is to stop being a ghost." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "These past days with you and Little Fox, it's the most alive I've felt in years, so yes, I understand the danger, and I'm choosing it anyway." Antonio reached across the space between their horses, caught her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, gentle. "Elena used to say that love was the most dangerous choice a person could make in this territory," he said. "That it gave your enemies a weapon nothing else could match, But she chose it anyway. Said anything worth having was worth the risk. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. His thumb traced patterns on her palm. I think she would have chosen you for us. If she could have. Someone strong enough to stand with us. Not just behind us. The words hung in the desert air like a promise. Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. When was the last time she'd cried for something other than loss? We should keep moving. She managed. Yes, but he held her hand a moment longer before letting go. They rode on through the night. 3 people and a child bound together by violence and choice and something that might, given time and courage, grow into love. Behind them, the hidden canyon kept its secrets. Ahead, the unknown waited with all its dangers and possibilities. But for the first time in years, Rebecca Cross wasn't facing that unknown alone. And that, she thought as Little Fox stirred and nestled closer to his father, made all the difference. Even if the road led through fire and blood, at least she would walk it with people worth fighting for. The mission bells were already ringing dawn prayers when they finally stopped to rest. And Rebecca realized she'd been wrong about one thing. She wasn't choosing danger. She was choosing life. And after so long among the dead, even danger felt like a kind of grace. The mission of San Rafael sat like a fortress of faith against the desert, its white walls glowing in the dawn light. They'd ridden through the night, and both horses and riders were near exhaustion. Father Francisco met them at the gate, his weathered face showing no surprise at their condition. Antonio, he said simply, it has been too long. Father, Antonio dismounted carefully, lifting Little Fox down. We need sanctuary. You have it. The priest's eyes moved to Rebecca, taking in her dust-covered clothes and the shotgun across her saddle. All of you, come. The horses need water and you need rest. They were given a small room in the mission's guest quarters. Rebecca tended to Antonio's wound. The hard riding had pulled some stitches while Little Fox curled up on a narrow bed and fell instantly asleep. He's exhausted, Rebecca said softly, covering the child with a rough wool blanket. He's stronger than he looks. Antonio winced as she worked. Gets that from his mother, too. Stop moving. You've torn 2 stitches. She bent closer, focused on her work, aware of his eyes on her face. This is becoming a habit. I'm getting hurt. Me patching you up. She tied off the new suture. There, try not to tear these ones. His hand caught hers before she could pull away. Rebecca, what you did yesterday was necessary, was brave. His grip tightened. And when Little Fox, when he saved you, I've never been so terrified and proud at the same time. She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. He shouldn't have had to. No child should. No, but this is the world we live in. The world he has to survive in. Antonio's face was grave. I've been thinking, Brennan won't stop. Not now. He can't afford to leave any of us alive. Then we stop him first. A bitter smile touched his lips. I'm one man with a bad habit of getting stabbed. You're a woman who's tired of men like Brennan thinking they own the world. Rebecca's voice hardened. I've seen too many of them. During the war, after, men who take what they want and leave others to bleed. Well, I'm done watching. Antonio studied her for a long moment. You've changed since that day in Broken Mesa. No, I've just remembered who I was before grief made me small. She squeezed his hand once, then pulled away. Rest. I need to think. She left him with his son and walked out into the mission courtyard. The morning was already warming, and somewhere a dove called mournfully. Father Francisco found her by the well. You are troubled, my child, he said. I'm not your child, Father. Haven't been anyone's child for a long time. Yet you are troubled. He settled beside her on the stone wall. Antonio is a good man. Complicated, perhaps, but good. Good men die just as easily as bad ones. Easier, sometimes. You speak from experience. Rebecca laughed, harsh and short. Too much experience. I was a healer in the war. Father, do you know what that means? It means I held boys' hands while they died calling for their mothers. It means I sewed men back together knowing they'd only be sent out to be torn apart again. It means I saved lives that were only going to be thrown away. Yet you saved them anyway. Yes, she was surprised to feel tears on her cheeks. And I'd do it again. That's the hell of it. I can't stop trying, even when I know how it ends. The priest was quiet for a moment. Then, Antonio's wife, Elena, used to sit in this very spot. She too was a healer, in her way. She said once that healing was an act of defiance against a world that seemed determined to break everything. What happened to her? You know what happened, but perhaps you're asking why it happened. At Rebecca's nod, he continued. She was teaching the children of the local Apache band, reading, writing, numbers. Some said she was making them too white. Others said she was making them too Apache. When you stand between worlds, you become a target for both. And Antonio couldn't protect her. He was gone, earning the money that kept them alive. That's his burden to carry, just as yours is whoever you couldn't save. Rebecca closed her eyes. My son, Samuel, he was 4 when the fever took him. My husband followed a week later. I had all this knowledge, all these skills, and I couldn't save either of them. Could anyone have? I don't know. That's what haunts me. If I'd tried something different, if I'd been faster, better. She shook her head. It doesn't matter now. Doesn't it? You saved Antonio. You're teaching his son. Perhaps God... Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't tell me about God's plan. I've seen too much to believe in plans. Father Francisco smiled sadly. Then believe in choice. You chose to help a bleeding man. You chose to stay with a broken family. You choose, each day, to heal rather than harm. That's not God's plan, my dear. That's yours. Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of running feet made them both turn. Miguel burst into the courtyard, face grim. They're coming, he said. Brennan himself, with a dozen men. They'll be here within the hour. Rebecca was moving before he finished speaking, running for their room. Antonio was already up, strapping on his gun belt despite her protests about his stitches. How many, he asked Miguel. 13, including Brennan, armed heavy. Miguel's face was grave. Too many for a straight fight. Then we don't fight straight. Antonio looked at Rebecca. That plan you had about the documents? No time for that now. No, but Brennan thinks like a businessman. Everything's negotiable to him. A cold smile touched Antonio's lips. Let's see what he's willing to trade. They had minutes to prepare. Rebecca helped Little Fox into the mission's hidden cellar, the one Father Francisco swore dated back to Spanish rule. The boy went reluctantly, clinging to her hand. You stay quiet, she told him firmly. No matter what you hear, promise me. He nodded, eyes huge in the dim light. I'll come for you when it's safe. She kissed his forehead, tasting dust and fear. Be brave. Back in the courtyard, Antonio and Miguel had taken positions. Father Francisco stood in the open, hands folded, every inch the peaceful priest. Rebecca found herself a spot with clear sight lines, the shotgun heavy in her hands. They came like thunder, horses' hooves echoing off the mission walls. Brennan rode at the front, a big man with pale eyes and an expensive suit incongruous in the desert dust. His men spread out, professional and alert. Father, Brennan touched his hat brim mockingly. I hear you're harboring fugitives. I harbor all who seek sanctuary. Francisco replied calmly, even killers, my men. Came to kill a child. Antonio stepped out, rifle casual in his hands. Your man said so as he died. Something about leverage. Brennan's face didn't change. Business is business, Stormwalker, you cost me considerable profit. That requires compensation. Name your price. You, alive. Come quietly, and I guarantee the woman and boy go free. Rebecca saw the trap immediately. Brennan's guarantees were worth less than dust. But Antonio was nodding thoughtfully, as if considering. Counteroffer. Antonio said, single combat. You and me. You win. You get everything. I win. You and your men ride away and never come back. Brennan laughed. Why would I accept that I have 13 guns to your... What 3 for? Because you're a businessman. Antonio smiled coldly. And I'm about to make you a business proposition. You kill me here in front of witnesses. And you'll have to kill everyone. The priest, the woman, every mission Indian who might talk. That's messy, expensive, bad for business. Go on. But single combat honor satisfied. Witnesses who'll swear it was fair. You can even spin it as self-defense. The half-breed tracker called you out. You had no choice. Antonio set his rifle aside slowly. Unless you're afraid to face me without your hired dogs. Rebecca held her breath. She saw the moment Brennan's pride overcame his caution. No man who'd clawed his way to power could back down from such a challenge, not in front of his men. Terms. Brennan dismounted. Knives, first blood or death? Antonio's smile was sharp. Your choice. Death, then? Brennan shed his coat, revealing a Bowie knife at his belt. I've wanted to gut you for months anyway. The courtyard cleared, men forming a rough circle. Rebecca wanted to protest, to stop this somehow. But she understood. This was Antonio's way, direct, honest, final. The two men circled each other, knives catching sunlight. Brennan was bigger, heavier, but Antonio moved like water, like wind. They came together in a clash of steel and will. It was brutal. Brennan fought like a barroom brawler, all power and rage. Antonio fought like a man who'd learned combat as survival. Every move economical. Blood appeared on both men, a slice here, a cut there. Then Brennan made a mistake. He overextended on a thrust, expecting Antonio to retreat. Instead, Antonio stepped inside the arc, his own blade finding the gap beneath Brennan's ribs. Not deep enough to kill instantly, but deep enough. Brennan staggered, face shocked. You should have taken the counteroffer. Antonio stepped back, breathing hard. First blood is mine. I said death. Brennan lunged again. Desperate now. It was his last mistake. Antonio's blade found his throat, quick and final. Brennan fell, hands clutching at the wound, eyes already glazing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Brennan's men began to mutter, hands moving to weapons. I wouldn't? Rebecca stepped out. Shotgun raised. Your boss called the terms. Everyone here saw it. Fair combat. Fairly won. Miguel appeared on the roof, rifle trained on the crowd. The lady's right. Time for you boys to ride on. One of Brennan's men, older than the others, nodded slowly. Fair's fair. He called it. He lost it. He looked at Antonio. This ends here. It ends. Antonio was swaying slightly, blood seeping through his shirt. Take him and go. They loaded Brennan's body, mounted up, and rode away without looking back. Only when the dust settled did Antonio finally collapse. Damn it! Rebecca was at his side instantly. You tore every stitch and added new wounds besides. Do you have any idea how hard you are to keep alive? Worth it, he asked, trying to smile. Ask me when you're not bleeding on consecrated ground. They got him inside, Rebecca working with desperate efficiency. The wounds weren't fatal, but blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll. Through it all, Antonio kept trying to speak. Little Fox is safe. Rest now. Need to tell you, in case... You're not dying. She pressed harder on a wound. I forbid it. Stubborn woman. You have no idea." When she'd finally stopped the bleeding and sewn him back together again, Rebecca sent Miguel to fetch little Fox. The boy exploded from the cellar and ran straight to his father's side. Antonio's eyes opened at his son's touch. "Hey, mijo, it's over. You're safe now." Little Fox's mouth opened, closed. His whole body trembled with the effort of speech. Then, in a voice rusty from disuse but clear as mission bells, "Papa." The word hung in the air like a miracle. Antonio's eyes filled with tears, his hand reaching to cup his son's face. "Yes, mijo, I'm here, I'm here." Little Fox turned to Rebecca, eyes bright. "Mama?" The word hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This boy, this beautiful, brave boy, was offering her something she'd thought lost forever. If you want me to be," she whispered. Little Fox nodded solemnly, then climbed onto the bed, carefully avoiding his father's wounds. He took Rebecca's hand, placed it in Antonio's, then covered both with his small ones. "Family," he said, the word careful but certain. Antonio's fingers tightened around Rebecca's. "The boy's got good ideas." "The best," Rebecca agreed, tears streaming freely now. Father Francisco, standing in the doorway, smiled. "God's plan," he murmured, too quiet for any but himself to hear. Outside, the mission bells rang for evening prayer, but in that small room, 3 souls were already engaged in their own thanksgiving. A woman who'd lost her voice to grief, a man who'd lost his heart to violence, and a boy who'd lost his words to tragedy, all of them finding in each other what they'd thought gone forever. The war wasn't over. There would be more violence, more running, more fear. But for now, for this moment, they had each other, and Little Fox had found his voice at last, speaking the only words that truly mattered. "Papa, Mama, family." In the end, Rebecca thought, some things were worth any price. Some healings came not from medicines or sutures, but from the simple, dangerous act of choosing to love again. And as Little Fox began to tell them, in halting but determined words, about his days of silence, she knew that this impossible, improbable, absolutely necessary family was worth everything, even if it had taken blood and fire to forge it, even if it might take more blood to keep it. Some things, she was learning, were sacred enough to fight for. The road to Carlos Vega's ranch wound through country that couldn't decide if it wanted to be desert or grassland. They'd been traveling for 3 days since leaving the mission, Antonio healing with each mile, Little Fox chattering like a magpie, making up for 3 years of silence. "And then the rabbit jumped so high, Papa higher than my head." The boy rode with Rebecca now. His small body relaxed against her as he recounted every memory his newly freed voice could capture. "Mama, did you ever see a rabbit jump that high?" Rebecca's heart still stuttered each time he called her that. "Once, back in Ohio, it was running from my father's hunting dog." "What happened to it?" "It got away. Rabbits are clever like that." Miguel rode beside them, grinning at the boy's enthusiasm. "Careful, little warrior. You'll wear out your voice before we reach the ranch." "I have lots of words saved up," Little Fox said seriously. 3 years of words, that's, he frowned, calculating. More than 1,000 days of words. Antonio laughed from his position at the rear, watching their back trail. "Your mother would say that's enough words to fill a book, mijo. Will you teach me to write them down? Mama like mother used to." "Of course." Rebecca adjusted her hold on him. "We'll start as soon as we're settled." The landscape changed as they descended toward the river valley where Vega's ranch sprawled. Cottonwoods appeared, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Cattle grazed in the distance, and somewhere a cowbell rang like a dinner invitation. "There." Miguel pointed to a collection of buildings nestled in a bend of the river. "Casa Vega, sanctuary." It was larger than Rebecca had expected a proper hacienda with thick adobe walls, several outbuildings, and what looked like a small village attached. Children played in the dusty streets while women washed clothes by the river. Men worked with horses in a large corral. Carlos Vega himself met them at the main gate. He was a small, neat man with silver temples and eyes that missed nothing. "Antonio, welcome. Welcome. And this must be the famous healer who tamed the untamable Stormwalker." "Nobody tames me," Antonio protested, dismounting carefully. "No," Carlos's eyes twinkled. "Then why do you look like a man who's found home?" They were given rooms in the main house, a suite with 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting area. Little Fox ran immediately to the window, exclaiming over the view of horses and the river beyond. "It's safe here," Carlos said quietly. "My men patrol regularly, and the federales leave us alone. We're too far from anything important to matter." "We're grateful," Rebecca said, "for everything. Antonio saved my nephew's life once. This is small repayment," he smiled. "Besides, we need a healer. My old bones tell me rain is coming, and with rain comes sickness. You'll earn your keep." That night, they ate at a long table with Carlos's extended family, brothers, cousins, children, and grandchildren, all mixed together in cheerful chaos. Little Fox sat between Antonio and Rebecca, eyes wide at the sheer number of people. "Tell us the story." "Uncle Carlos," one of the children demanded. "About the Apache warrior." Carlos laughed. "Which one? I know many." "The one about the warrior who fell in love with a star." As Carlos began the tale, Rebecca felt Antonio's hand find hers beneath the table. His thumb traced patterns on her palm, a silent conversation of touch that made her pulse quicken. After dinner, with Little Fox asleep in his new bed, they stood on the terrace watching the stars reflect in the river. The night was soft, carrying the scent of flowers she couldn't name. "Rebecca," Antonio said quietly, "we need to talk about this us." Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "What about us?" He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm not an easy man to be with. My work, my blood, the enemies I've made, they'll always be there. You could have peace somewhere else. Safety." "I've had safety," Rebecca replied. "It tastes like ashes. It sounds like silence. It feels like dying slowly instead of living fully." "Is that what this is, living fully?" She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "When Little Fox calls me Mama, when you look at me like I'm not just convenient but necessary, when we sit at a table full of laughter and no one asks if I belong, yes, that's living." Antonio's hands came up to frame her face, gentle as if she were something precious and breakable. "Elena would have loved you," he said. "She would have chosen you for us." "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know. You're not replacing anything. You're building something new on the foundation she left." His forehead touched hers. "I love you, Rebecca. Not because I need a mother for my son, or because you saved my life. I love you because you see us clearly and choose to stay anyway." Rebecca's eyes burned with tears. "I love you too, both of you, even when you're bleeding on my clean floors and scaring me half to death." His laugh was soft, breath warm against her face. "I'll try to bleed less." "A liar." "Maybe, but I'll always come back. Always fight to come home to you." She kissed him then, under the vast Mexican stars, tasting promises and desire and the salt of her own tears. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt something settle in her chest, a rightness, a completion of a circle she hadn't known was broken. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Antonio rested his forehead against hers again. "Marry me." "What?" "Marry me, here at the ranch. Let Carlos's priest make it official. Let me give you and Little Fox my name, my protection, everything I have." Rebecca pulled back to see his face. "Antonio Stormwalker. Is that a proposal, or a tactical decision? Both. A man should be tactical about the things that matter most. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. But mostly it's me wanting to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Official, legal, before God and man and any other authority you care to name. The Apache don't care about legal papers. No, but the Mexicans do. The Americans do. And I want every protection for you and Little Fox if something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you, Rebecca. His voice was gentle but firm. We both know better than that. My work, the life I've led it, leaves marks, makes enemies. I need to know you're protected. She was quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of what he was asking. Not just marriage, but acceptance of all that came with it, the danger, the uncertainty, the constant vigilance. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I'll marry you, but you have to promise me something. Anything. No more getting stabbed. Shot, maybe, if you must, but I'm running low on suture thread. His laugh was rich and full, echoing across the water. I'll do my best. They told Little Fox the next morning over breakfast. His face lit up like sunrise. Really, you'll really be my mama forever? Forever, Rebecca confirmed, smoothing his hair. And we'll all have the same name like a real family. The realist, Antonio assured him. The wedding was set for 3 days hence, just enough time for word to spread through the ranch community. Maria, Carlos's wife, immediately took charge, declaring that no wedding under her roof would be anything less than spectacular. But we don't need, Rebecca began. Hush, Maria commanded. You saved my husband's best tracker. You brought a silent child back to speech. You think we won't celebrate that besides? Her eyes softened. Every woman deserves a proper wedding, even if it's not her first. Rebecca found herself swept into a whirlwind of preparations. A dress appeared white cotton embroidered with small blue flowers. Women she'd barely met altered it to fit, chattering in rapid Spanish about luck and love and children. Little Fox appointed himself ring-bearer with great solemnity, practicing his walk up and down the hacienda's long hall until even the dogs grew tired of watching. The night before the wedding, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She stood on the terrace again, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would change everything, make permanent what had been growing between them since that day in Broken Mesa. Second thoughts. Antonio's voice came from behind her. No, just remembering. He came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she felt his presence like a physical thing. Tell me about him. Your first husband. Rebecca smiled sadly. James was kind, gentle. He loved books more than horses, could quote Shakespeare at the drop of a hat. He should never have gone to war, but he felt it was his duty. She paused. He died, still believing in duty and honor and all those pretty words they used to dress up slaughter. And your son, Samuel, he was light itself, curious about everything, fearless in the way only children can be. He would have loved Little Fox. They would have been such friends. Antonio's hand found hers. They're part of you. That means they're part of our family too. We'll tell Little Fox about them. Keep their memory alive. You don't mind that I carry other ghosts? We all carry ghosts. Querida, the trick is learning which ones to honor and which ones to let rest. He lifted her hand, kissed her palm. Tomorrow we start building new memories, ones that might outlast the ghosts. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. The entire ranch seemed to be involved, from the smallest child scattering flower petals to the oldest vaquero playing violin. Rebecca stood in her borrowed room, Maria fussing with her hair, and tried to calm her racing heart. You're beautiful, Maria declared, like a woman reborn. In the mirror, Rebecca saw the truth of it. The gaunt, haunted woman who drifted into Broken Mesa was gone. In her place stood someone alive, present, ready to embrace whatever came next. Little Fox burst in, wearing his finest clothes and a grin that could have lit the territory. "Papa says to tell you he's waiting, and that Uncle Miguel is making sure he doesn't run away." "Your papa's not going anywhere," Rebecca laughed. "He's stuck with us now." The ceremony was held in the hacienda's courtyard, under an arbor woven with desert roses. When Rebecca appeared, Antonio's face transformed with such naked joy that several women sighed audibly. He wore his best jacket over a crisp white shirt, looking every inch the dangerous man he was, except for his eyes. His eyes held only love. Father Diego, Carlos's priest, performed the ceremony in a mix of Spanish and English, blessing their union in both traditions. When he asked for the rings, Little Fox stepped forward proudly, only dropping them once in his excitement. "With this ring," Antonio said, sliding the simple gold band onto Rebecca's finger, "I give you my name, my protection, my love, forever and a day after that." "With this ring," Rebecca echoed, her voice steady despite her tears. "I give you my healing hands, my stubborn heart, my trust, forever and whatever comes after, forever." "You may kiss your bride," Father Diego smiled. The kiss was sweet, promising, and just long enough to make the younger vaqueros whoop appreciatively. When they parted, Little Fox tugged on their joined hands. "Now we're really family?" he asked. "Now we're really family," they confirmed together. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, more food than an army could eat, and enough toasts to make even hardened vaqueros sentimental. Rebecca danced with Antonio under the stars, feeling his heartbeat against hers, marveling at how right it felt. "No regrets," he murmured against her ear. "Only that it took so long to find you." Later, much later, when the party had wound down and Little Fox was asleep in his bed, Antonio carried Rebecca over the threshold of their room. They came together with a passion born of trust and survival, and the bone-deep recognition of souls that matched. In the aftermath, lying tangled together as the moon painted silver patterns on their skin, Rebecca traced the scars on Antonio's chest, each one a story of survival, of close calls that could have stolen this moment from them. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and dangerous on her tongue. "And I love you," he replied, pulling her closer. "My wife, my salvation, my stubborn healer who won't let me die no matter how hard I try." She laughed against his chest. "Don't test that theory too often." "I'll do my best, but Rebecca," he tipped her chin up to meet his eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing us, for staying, for giving my son his voice back and me a reason to keep fighting that isn't revenge or duty or simple survival." He kissed her softly, for choosing to live again, with us. Rebecca felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "We saved each other," she whispered. "All three of us. That's what family does." Outside, a night bird called, and the river sang its endless song. Inside, two people who had known too much loss held tight to new love, building a fortress of flesh and promise against whatever storms might come. And in the room next door, a little boy slept peacefully, his voice restored, his family complete, his dreams full of rabbits that jumped impossibly high and parents who would always catch him if he fell. 3 months of peace. That's what they'd had at Vega Ranch, 3 months of watching Little Fox grow stronger and more confident, of building a life that felt solid and real. Rebecca had set up a small clinic, treating everything from broken bones to difficult births. Antonio had taken select tracking jobs, always returning within a week, always careful. They should have known it couldn't last. The trouble started with smoke on the horizon. Rebecca saw it first from where she was teaching Little Fox his letters in the courtyard. Black smoke, too much to be a campfire, rising from the direction of the outer pastures. "Papa," Little Fox called, spotting his father emerging from the stable. Antonio's face went grim as he studied the smoke. Miguel appeared moments later, already armed. Raiders? Miguel asked. Maybe. Could be Comancheros. Could be bandits. Antonio was already moving, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. Could be worse. What's worse? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she knew. Brennan had friends, business partners who might think we cost them money. He looked at her, his eyes holding that particular intensity that meant trouble was coming. Take Little Fox to the main house. Tell Carlos to arm the men. But Carlos was already in the courtyard, his usually pleasant face hard with purpose. My outriders report 20 men, maybe more. They hit the north pasture, scattered the cattle. This is not random. They're driving us out. Antonio said, testing our defenses. Then we give them an answer. Carlos turned to his segundo. Ring the bell. All hands to defensive positions. The hacienda transformed from peaceful ranch to fortress with startling speed. Women and children moved to secure inner rooms, while men took positions on walls and rooftops. Rebecca found herself in familiar territory, setting up a treatment station for the wounded she knew would come. I want to help, Little Fox protested as she settled him with the other children. You are helping. Keep the little ones calm. Tell them stories. That's important too. He nodded reluctantly, then caught her hand. Mama, is it happening again like before? Her heart broke a little. No child should have to ask like before about violence. We're safer here, she assured him. Stronger, and I promise we'll get through this. The attack came at sunset. Rebecca watched from a window as riders appeared on the ridge, dark shapes against the dying light. They sat their horses for a long moment, letting the defenders see their numbers. Antonio Stormwalker, the voice carried clearly across the distance. You have something that belongs to us. Rebecca didn't recognize the speaker, but she saw Antonio stiffen where he crouched behind the wall. Jake Morrison, he said quietly to Miguel. Brennan's partner in the gun trade. Should have known he wouldn't let it go. Morrison rode forward, just out of rifle range. You cost us a fortune. Breed Brennan's dead. His roots are compromised, and the army's breathing down our necks. Time to pay up. I don't owe you anything. Antonio called back. Your partner called the play and lost. That's on him. Maybe so, but his woman, now that's different. She put holes in 3 of my best men. Can't let that stand. Ice flooded Rebecca's veins. They weren't just here for Antonio. They were here for her, too. Besides, Morrison continued, heard you got yourself a new family. Be a shame if something happened to them. Why don't you come out? Make this simple, you and the woman. Leave the boy out of it. Counter-offer. Antonio shouted, You turn around and ride away. Live to steal another day. Morrison laughed. 20 guns to your what dozen, I like my odds. Your funeral. The first shots shattered the evening quiet. Morrison's men charged from multiple directions, trying to overwhelm the defenses. But Carlos Vega hadn't held this land for 20 years by being soft. His men were experienced, disciplined. They met the attack with withering fire. Rebecca forced herself to stay at the medical station as the wounded began arriving. A vaquero with a bullet through his shoulder. Another with a graze across his ribs. She worked with automatic precision, her hands steady even as her heart raced. How bad? Maria asked, helping her hold a man down while she extracted a bullet. Could be worse. They're testing us, not committing fully yet. Rebecca tied off a bandage. They'll wait for dark. Try to get in close. She was right. As full dark fell, the attacks became more focused. Someone had gotten close enough to throw torches, trying to set fire to the outbuildings. Rebecca could hear Antonio's rifle, steady as a heartbeat, picking off targets with lethal precision. Then came the sound she'd been dreading, splintering wood from the east wall. They'd brought axes, maybe a battering ram. If they breached the wall, I need every man who can hold a gun. Carlos was shouting. They're concentrating on the east side. Rebecca made a decision that would have horrified her months ago. She grabbed her shotgun and headed for the breach. The scene was chaos. Morrison's men had broken through, pouring into the courtyard. Defenders rushed to meet them, and suddenly it was hand-to-hand combat in the flickering light of burning wagons. Rebecca saw Antonio go down under 2 men and reacted without thought. The shotgun roared, taking one attacker off him. Antonio rolled, came up with his knife, and the second man fell. "I told you to stay with the wounded," he shouted. "They'll all be wounded if we don't hold here." She fired again, driving back a man trying to flank them. Then she saw him, Morrison himself, moving through the battle like death incarnate. He was heading for the main house, for the children. Antonio. But he'd seen it too. They moved together, fighting their way through the melee. A man lunged at Rebecca with a knife. She reversed the shotgun and caught him in the jaw with a stock. Another came from the left, and Antonio's pistol spoke. They reached the main house steps just as Morrison kicked in the door. Rebecca heard screams from inside the children. "No!" She burst through behind Morrison, Antonio on her heels. The scene inside stopped her heart. Morrison had Little Fox by the arm, dragging him toward a side door. The other children cowered against the far wall, some crying. "Let him go," Rebecca said, voice deadly calm. Morrison turned, smiling. "The breed's whelp don't think so. Boy's worth his weight in gold to the right people. Apache blood, raised white. There's men who pay high for that." I said let him go. She raised the shotgun. "You won't shoot. Might hit the boy." He was right. Little Fox was too close, Morrison using him as a shield. But Rebecca had learned things in the war. Terrible things about choices and angles and acceptable losses. "Little Fox," she said clearly, "remember what I taught you about rabbits?" The boy's eyes widened with understanding. Then he went completely limp, dropping like dead weight. Morrison, surprised, loosened his grip for just an instant. Rebecca's shotgun spoke. Morrison spun away, clutching his shoulder, his own gun flying from his hand. Before he could recover, Antonio was on him, knife at his throat. "You touched my son," Antonio said, voice cold as winter stone. "That was your last mistake." "Wait," Morrison gasped. "I surrender. You can't kill an unarmed man who surrenders." "Can't I?" Antonio's blade pressed deeper. "Papa," Little Fox said quietly. He'd gotten to his feet, was standing very straight. "Mama says we're better than them? That we choose to be better." Antonio looked at his son, then at Rebecca. Something shifted in his face. "You're right, mijo." He hauled Morrison to his feet. "Lucky for you. My son has more honor than I do. But if you come near my family again—" "I won't, I swear." Outside, the sounds of battle were dying. Carlos's men had rallied, driving the attackers back. Those who could flee did, those who couldn't surrendered. In the aftermath, they counted the cost. 3 of Carlos's men dead, 7 wounded. Of Morrison's 20, 8 were dead. 6 captured, including Morrison himself. The rest scattered to the desert. "We'll turn them over to the federales," Carlos decided. "Let Mexican justice handle them." Rebecca was bandaging Antonio's newest collection of cuts, nothing serious. Thank God when Miguel brought news that chilled her. 2 of them got away with Morrison's ledgers. Rode hard north. He looked grim. "If those books have what I think they have. Names." Antonio finished. "Roots. Everyone who bought guns from Brennan and Morrison. Both sides of the border. Worth killing for." Miguel agreed. "Worth a lot of killing." Rebecca felt the peace they'd built crumbling like sand. "So it's not over?" "It's never over," Antonio said quietly. "Not really. There's always another Morrison, another Brennan, always someone who thinks violence is profitable." That night, after the wounded were tended and the dead were buried, Rebecca stood in their room watching Little Fox sleep. He'd been so brave, so clever with the rabbit trick. But he shouldn't have had to be. "We could leave," Antonio said from behind her. "Go east, maybe California, somewhere they don't know us." Running again. She turned to face him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you safe, both of you." "And I want us together, all of us." She moved into his arms. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy. Your work, your past, they're part of who you are. I could change, find different work." "Could you really?" She pulled back to see his face. "Antonio, you're a hunter. It's in your blood, your bones. Asking you to be something else would be like asking an eagle to swim." He was quiet for a long moment. "Elena said something similar once. Said I was what the desert made me, and fighting that would only bring misery." "Smart woman. I seem to find them." He kissed her forehead. "But Rebecca, today, when Morrison had Little Fox—" "I know." She shuddered. "But we got him back. We'll always get him back." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise we'll never stop trying." She laid her hand over his heart. "That's what family does. We protect each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." A soft sound from the doorway made them turn. Little Fox stood there, bare feet silent on the floor. "Bad dreams, mijo?" Antonio asked. The boy nodded, then padded over to them. "Can I stay here tonight?" "Of course." Rebecca lifted him onto their bed, settling him between them. "Always." As Little Fox curled against her, already sliding back toward sleep, he murmured, "Mama, were you scared today?" "Terrified," she answered honestly. "But you came anyway. You and Papa both." "That's what courage is," Antonio said softly, "being scared and acting anyway." "Then I want to be courageous too, like you." The boy yawned. "All of us together. Courageous." Rebecca met Antonio's eyes over their son's head. Yes, there would be more violence, more men like Morrison who thought power came from guns and gold. But there would also be a child learning courage, a family forged in fire, love stronger than fear. "All of us together," she agreed. "Always." Outside, the desert wind sang its ancient song, indifferent to human struggles. But inside, 3 souls held tight to each other, building their fortress of love one day. One choice, one act of courage at a time. The ledgers Morrison's men had taken would bring trouble, Rebecca knew that. There would be more battles to fight, more wounds to heal, more nights of standing watch against the darkness. But as she lay there, her son's breathing evening out into sleep, her husband's hand warm in hers, she found she wasn't afraid. They'd faced down men who dealt in death and chosen life instead. They'd looked at violence and answered with family. Let them come, she thought. Let them all come. We'll be ready. Because some things were worth any price, even blood. And the love that filled this room, complicated and hard-won and absolutely necessary, was worth everything. 6 months after the battle with Morrison's men, the Vega Ranch had become more than a refuge. It had become home. Rebecca's clinic served not just the ranch, but surrounding communities. Apache, Mexican, and Anglo settlers all came seeking her healing hands. And she turned none away. Little Fox had grown 2 inches and gained a vocabulary that amazed everyone. He helped in the clinic, quick to learn and gentle with patients. Some days, Rebecca caught glimpses of the healer he might become. "Mama, Mrs. Yanez is here," he announced one morning. "Her baby's coming." Rebecca hurried to attend the birth while Antonio prepared to leave on another tracking job, this time for the territorial government, hunting rustlers who'd been plaguing the valley. It was honest work, the kind that built rather than destroyed. 2 weeks at most, he promised, kissing her goodbye. "Miguel's going with me." "Be careful," she said, as she always did. "Always am," he replied, as he always did. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the way Little Fox clung to his father longer than usual, or how the morning birds seemed quieter. Rebecca pushed the feeling aside. They'd earned their peace through blood and courage. Surely it would hold. The birth went well, a healthy girl who came into the world squalling her displeasure. Rebecca was cleaning up when Carlos burst in, face grave. "Riders coming? Lots of them. Flying army colors." Rebecca's heart sank. The army meant official business, usually the kind that disrupted lives. The contingent that rode into the ranch was impressive, 20 soldiers led by a major whose uniform remained crisp despite the desert heat. But it was the civilian with them that made Rebecca's blood run cold. She knew him, Colonel Marcus Wade, though he wore no uniform now. Last she'd seen him, he'd been overseeing field hospitals in Georgia, a man who viewed human suffering as numbers in a report. "Mrs. Stormwalker," Wade said, touching his hat. "Or should I say, Mrs. Cross. Imagine my surprise learning you were here." "It's Stormwalker now," she said evenly. "What do you want?" Marcus, direct as always. His smile was thin. "I'm here on government business. The stolen ledgers from the Morrison gang have revealed complications. Your husband's name features prominently. As the man who stopped them. As a man who knows too much about too many operations." Wade dismounted, his movements precise. "Where is he?" "Tracking rustlers for the territorial governor. Won't be back for days." "Convenient." Wade's eyes swept the ranch, calculating. "No matter. You'll do for now." "For what?" "The government needs those ledgers decoded. Names, places, routes. Your husband worked both sides of the law long enough to understand the code Morrison used." He smiled again. "We're prepared to offer amnesty for any past irregularities, in exchange for cooperation." Rebecca felt the trap closing. "And if he refuses, then we'll have to assume he was more involved than we thought. Accessories to gun running, murder, theft." Wade's voice hardened. "Did you know the penalty for supplying weapons to hostile Indians? Your husband's Apache blood won't help him there." "You're threatening us." "I'm offering opportunity. There's a difference." He gestured to the soldiers. "We'll be staying until Stormwalker returns. As guests, of course." The next days were tense. Soldiers camped on Vega land, their presence a constant reminder of the outside world's reach. Little Fox grew quiet again, shadows returning to his eyes as uniformed men reminded him of other violence. Rebecca sent word to Antonio through Carlos's network, praying it would reach him in time to warn him. But Wade was clever, his men watching all roads. On the fourth night, Rebecca woke to a hand over her mouth. Her heart hammered until she recognized Antonio's scent, sage and leather and home. "Shh," he breathed against her ear. "Where's the boy?" "Sleeping." "Antonio. Wade." "I know. Miguel's watching the soldiers." He removed his hand, and she turned to see him in the moonlight. "We need to leave. Tonight." "Running again." "No, flanking." His smile was sharp. "Wade wants those ledgers decoded fine, but on our terms." They woke Little Fox quietly, the boy coming alert with the instant awareness of a child who'd known danger. They slipped out through hidden ways Antonio had mapped their first week, always planning for escape, even in peace. Miguel waited with horses in a dry wash outside the ranch. "They're lazy," he reported. "City soldiers, no night patrols beyond the obvious routes." They rode hard through darkness, not for the border, but toward the territorial capital. If Wade wanted to play government games, Antonio would meet him on that field. "I know the federal judge in Prescott," Antonio explained as they rested the horses. "Honest man, owes me for finding his kidnapped daughter. He'll listen." "And say what?" Rebecca asked. "That the army's trying to blackmail you. That I have information about corruption that goes higher than Morrison. Those ledgers name government suppliers, army contractors, even a senator. His face was grim. "Wade's not here for justice. He's here to bury evidence." They reached Prescott 3 days later, dusty and exhausted. Judge Harrison received them in his study, listening with growing alarm as Antonio laid out the truth. The ledgers didn't just document gun running, they revealed a web of corruption reaching into the highest levels of territorial government. If Wade gets those decoded ledgers, names will disappear, evidence will vanish, good men will die to keep secrets. Antonio placed a wrapped package on the desk. I kept copies, insurance. Harrison studied the pages, face darkening. "This is extensive, and Wade is named here. 3 transactions. Kickbacks for looking the other way, while guns went to raiders who attacked settlements the government wanted cleared." Antonio's voice was cold. "He's cleaning house, not seeking justice." "Can you prove it?" "Give me federal protection and I'll decode every line. Names, dates, amounts, everything." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Done. I'll wire Washington immediately. In the meantime," he wrote rapidly, "this grants you federal protection as a witness. Wade touches you. He's facing federal charges." They stayed in Prescott for a week while the political machinery ground into motion. Rebecca watched Antonio work with the federal prosecutors, his memory sharp as his tracking skills. Each decoded entry revealed new corruption, new crimes. Little Fox, safe in the judge's house, slowly relaxed. He played with the judge's grandchildren, his laughter returning. But at night, he still crept into his parents' bed, needing reassurance they were still there. "Will we go home?" he asked one evening. "To the ranch?" "Yes, mijo," Antonio promised. "Soon." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Wade arrived in Prescott with a full cavalry company, demanding Antonio's arrest. He found instead a federal marshal with papers from Washington. "Colonel Wade, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and misuse of government resources." The marshal announced, "You'll return to Washington for trial." Wade's face went white, then red. "This is a mistake. That half-breed is lying." "That half-breed," Judge Harrison interrupted coldly, "has provided evidence of crimes that would shame the nation, evidence that names you repeatedly." As they led Wade away, he turned to Antonio with pure hatred. "This isn't over. You think you've won. I have friends. Influence. You have a cell." Antonio replied, "And time to think about all the lives your greed cost." With Wade's arrest, the Army presence at Vega Ranch dissolved. They returned to find celebration. Carlos had held hope they'd return safely, and their success meant safety for all the borderland communities Wade would have sacrificed. But the victory felt hollow. They'd won, but at a cost. Their names were now in federal records. Their peaceful anonymity was gone forever. "We could still leave," Antonio said that first night home. "Start fresh somewhere else." Rebecca looked around their room at Little Fox's drawings on the walls, at the medical instruments she'd arranged just so, at the view of mountains that had become as familiar as breathing. "No," she said firmly. "This is our home. We've bled for it, fought for it. I won't let fear drive us away. Even knowing there might be others, Morrison had friends. Wade had allies." "Then we faced them." She moved into his arms. Together, always together. Little Fox appeared in the doorway, drawn by their voices. "Are we staying?" "What do you think, mijo?" Antonio asked. "It might be dangerous." The boy considered seriously. "Mama's clinic is here. The horses are here. Our family is here." He shrugged. "Danger is everywhere, but home is only here." "Out of the mouths of babes," Rebecca thought. "Then it's decided. The Stormwalker family stays." That night, as they sat on the terrace watching stars wheel overhead, Rebecca reflected on the strange paths that had brought them here. A wounded man in a dusty street, a silent child who found his voice, a broken healer who learned to mend more than bodies. The desert tried to take everything from us, Antonio said quietly, echoing words he'd spoken before. But it gave me you, and I ain't letting you go. Good, Rebecca replied, because you're stuck with us now. Me and my stubborn healing, Little Fox and his big heart. We're yours. Antonio Stormwalker, for better or worse. I'll take it all, he said, kissing her temple. Every moment, every danger, every sunrise, as long as we face it together. Little Fox yawned hugely. Can we have pancakes for breakfast to celebrate being home? Pancakes it is, Rebecca laughed. With honey from Mr. Santos's bees. As they went inside, Antonio paused at the door, looking back at the desert that had shaped them all. Rebecca knew he was thinking of Elena, of the family he'd lost, of all the ghosts that haunted the borderlands. She would have been proud. Rebecca said softly, of you, of Little Fox, of the life you've built from the ashes. Of us, he corrected, the life we've built. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Rebecca woke to the sound of Little Fox chattering to the horses, Antonio whistling as he worked, normal sounds of a normal day. She rose, dressed, and went to start her clinic hours. The first patient was an Apache woman with a sick baby. Rebecca treated the child while the mother watched warily, unused to white healers who didn't judge. Your husband, the woman said suddenly. Stormwalker, he is known among the people. Yes, known as a man who walks between worlds but belongs to his family. She gathered her now peaceful baby. This is good. The desert needs such men. As the woman left, Rebecca saw Antonio teaching Little Fox to track in the courtyard, both of them laughing at something. Miguel had arrived with news of possible work, honest work, tracking strays for a cattle association. This was their life now. Not perfect, not without danger, but theirs, built from loss and hope, violence and healing, the worst of humanity and the best. Mama, Little Fox called. Papa says I'm getting good enough to help track. Can I go next time? When you're older, she and Antonio said in unison, then laughed at their synchronization. You always say that, Little Fox complained, but he was smiling. And we'll keep saying it until it's true. Rebecca replied, Now come help me. Mrs. Rodriguez will be here soon for her tonic. As the day unfolded, normal, precious. There's Rebecca felt the last of her ghosts settling into peaceful rest. She would always carry James and Samuel in her heart, just as Antonio would carry Elena. But the living had claimed them now, drawn them into a future worth fighting for. The desert had tried to take everything, but in the end, it had given them each other. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious. Where are you enjoying this tale of the Wild West? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Rebecca, Antonio, and Little Fox's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover our Western adventures. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.